my prediction is that the cost of launching a crypto startup is going to plummet. Instead, you're going to get, $10,000 of cloud compute. Who's going to out Solana? Nobody's going to out Solana. The question is, who is going to do something different than what Solana is offering to its users? That's kind of the vibe you get right now looking at these AI agents, is that none of them are that clever. None of them are that unique. We will almost certainly experience a 20% to 30% correction at some point in 2025, but I think it'll be a good year.
GM, and welcome back to SolanaFloor. 2025 is underway. We have a pro-crypto administration that's about to enter the White House, and confidence from both retail and institutions is very high. But what exactly is in store for crypto and the Solana ecosystem? Can Solana really continue growing? Will AI agents finally take over? There's just so many questions we have to answer about 2025. So to make sense of it all, I'm joined by Haseeb Qureshi. Haseeb, GM, and welcome back to SolanaFloor.
Glad to be here.
Before we start looking through a little crystal ball into the future and making some wild projections about 2025, I want to start by thanking you for some of the insights you shared with us last time on celebrity tokens, because we've seen some of the rugs lately, and certainly supports your gut feeling that celebrity tokens and meme coins are largely a way to transfer money from the fans or the degens to the celebrity. So thank you for giving us a bit of a heads up on that, and hopefully some of our listeners and some of your listeners over on the chopping block also managed to avoid getting rugged by celebs. So again, thank you.
Of course. I mean, it's one of these things that while it's happening, everyone kind of knows in the back of their head, like, okay, this is probably not sustainable. But the thing about when you have that much energy behind a bubble, the thing about bubbles is that even if you know it's a bubble, it's rational to participate. That's why bubbles are so nefarious. So I don't begrudge anybody who went in and said, look, I kind of know that this is probably not the future of finance. This is probably not what, I'm probably not going to be holding celeb coins for the rest of my financial lifetime. But hey, I want to get in while the getting's good. So I can't begrudge anybody for jumping into it. But as long as you're in there with eyes wide open, I think, do your best.
Fingers crossed nobody got super rugged. I want to start really wide here and then sort of zoom into some specifics. You had a post that went fairly viral, I think it's safe to say. Let's start with Solana. Obviously, it's had an incredible year in terms of growth, usage metrics, stability, institutional tensions growing. It's looking pretty good for the Solana ecosystem. But you said despite that, and I'm sort of quoting here, EVM market share is actually going to grow in 2025. So I'm curious if you think this is going to be affected or reflected rather by price action as well. Do you think ETH can outperform Sol in 2025? And if so, what are the Sol maxis missing?
That's a good question, actually. So my claim that EVM market share is going to grow actually is not a prediction about price. It's a prediction about the amount of software and products that are going to be offered that use these virtual machines as the underlying layer. So things like Monad, Barachain, I think Base is likely to expand as well as just things that are part of the OP superchain. And my prediction there is that Solana, I think, especially the Sol price, as far as I know, I don't have any particularly strong price prediction, but I think Solana is actually very, very entrenched and it's going to continue to do well going into 2025. But I think the pie is going to be grown by a lot of these new EVMs, in large part because a big part of the reason for this prediction is not just, okay, these new platforms are launching, but more specifically that it's because of the rise of AI that it's going to be a lot easier for these AIs that are writing a lot of the software in 2025 to learn how to write EVM as opposed to how to write SVM, because of the fact that there's just so much more EVM code. And everything that we're learning about how these AIs are able to write software is they really need a lot of training data. Machine intelligence needs lots of data. It needs lots and lots of data. And so what is the richest data set that we have right now for smart contract engineering? The answer is it's EVM based, because it's just been around forever and there's so much more of it. And so I think you get this effect that, for example, you talk to systems level programmers who are writing, things that are happening on FPGAs. And what they'll tell you is that I can't really use LLMs to write code for me. They just suck. They just can't solve problems. But you talk to web developers and they're like, LLMs are doing almost everything now. I barely do anything. I just, tell it what to do and send it off in the right direction. And so what you're going to get is this magnifying glass that it's sort of almost like the rich get richer. The more data that you already have about your software stack, the better and better AIs are going to get at your software stack, which is going to produce more training data for your software stack, which it kind of creates these magnifying effects. Now, that being said, SVM, the strength of SVM is the performance. And for applications that really need performance, or for applications that don't need a lot of innovation, right? So if you're launching the next meme coin, or you're doing a fairly thin part of your protocol, like let's say you're launching a game, but most of your game logic is off chain, and only the tokens and the actual interactions are on chain. Then actually, like the surface area on chain is pretty small. So you don't really need a lot of fresh code to be written by AIs. Or alternatively, if what you're building is very intensive, and it's okay that you have a lot of human engineering dollars that have to go into spending the engineering resources to build that thing, that's also okay. And the reality is today, even with the fact that most code is written by humans over the last 5 years, still it's not that expensive to launch a crypto startup. But my prediction is that the cost of launching a crypto startup is going to plummet because of the fact that AIs are going to become so much better at writing software. And that just means that instead of taking, $2-3 million to hire a team of engineers and get them to build this thing for a year, instead you're going to get, $10,000 of cloud compute to get, the new, Gemini V3, or to get, O1, or not O1, O5, let's say, from ChatGPT to write your smart contracts. And it's going to be so much cheaper and so much faster relative to what it is today. And the primary input, the primary cost to almost every startup in crypto is software. So if the cost of software goes down, that just means there's going to be more of everything. But the way in which that more of everything grows, I think, is going to be distributed according to where the densest trading data is. So that's why my prediction is that EVM market share probably grows. But in absolute terms, I think everything is going to grow. And I think SVM also benefits from the rise of AI and the deflationary effect on software. But I think some things are likely to grow more than others just because of the nature of that distribution of data.
Just while we're on the topic of Solana and sort of the pie growing, another one of your predictions was about the lines between L1s and L2s getting a little bit blurrier than they are at the moment. How do you see the discussion specific to Solana of whether or not Solana needs L2s and scaling solutions? How's that going to look in the next 12 months? Is one end of the argument going to look very silly, or might we find some new use cases for scaling solutions on Solana?
I'm somewhat bearish on scaling solutions on Solana. On some level, the whole story of Solana is that it is the scaling solution. If you need to scale Solana, then probably like Solana is just not the right toolkit for you, right? So I think on some level, at some point, there's going to be a consensus built for the most part that Solana is the place for really high performance software. If you need something to go really, really fast and be super low latency, Solana is the place for that. If you are like, hey, I have a game and it's very noisy and it's got a lot of data that I'm shoving on chain, and I can't really do it on Sol mainnet because there's just too much data, there's too much transaction volume, it's too crowded by meme coins. I want to build my own L2. I think it's just like, okay, well, this is just the wrong. This is just the wrong architecture for you. It's the wrong stack for you. And maybe you can do that in principle, but you're not really benefiting from all of the the power and the energy and the community and the consensus that's been built around Solana. So I think what you'll likely see is that, why am I nevertheless bullish on Solana or Sol? Is that, for example, one of the things that I think is just going to grow on Solana is stablecoins, right? I think it's just going to be a better and better place to very low latency, instantaneous transfer of stablecoins anywhere in the world. And if you're doing high frequency trading and you're moving assets from chain to chain really quickly, or you're just like, buying something, or you're like, transacting with somebody, the difference between 3-second latency and, half a second latency, it's a material difference with respect to the opportunity cost and just respect to UX, right? The difference between instantaneous and like, okay, sent, it's significant when you're talking about the kind of scale that these things are going to get to over the next year. So I think that's where Solana is going to thrive, but that doesn't really require building anything new. It just really requires getting more and more stuff built on top of Solana that are user facing, things like wallets and on ramps and off ramps and those types of things that are actually a layer above the underlying blockchain. So I think the L2 and scaling story, like I said, I'm skeptical that people ever really did care. Once upon a time, I thought people cared about whether something's an L2, whether something's an L1. But you saw Celo become an L1 that turned into an L2. You're now seeing some of the L2s talk about potentially becoming L1s and break out of their L2-ness, so to speak. So like Movement has been talking about potentially becoming an L1, and so you're just getting this blurring of boundaries. And I think the reason why this blurring of boundaries happens is that people realize, my token holders don't actually care. And the perception that, okay, well, one of these is virtuous, one of these, if you're not really in one category or the other, you're lying to people and you're doing something malicious. I think it has stopped resonating with users. And at the end of the day, users are the ones who ultimately decide what's going to be built and what's going to be used in the space. So I think the primary competition with something like Solana is actually probably going to come from something like Mega ETH, which is a super low latency layer 2 that can do things that a layer 1 can't necessarily do, but is built on EVM. That being said, I think Solana doesn't have that much to worry about because it has such a strong moat, such a strong network effect, such strong awareness, so many stablecoins, so much TVL. It's got a really strong DeFi ecosystem now on Solana that, when the meme coin bull run started, DeFi was still kind of limping along in the post FTX era. But today it's in a very, very strong place. And I think DeFi is kind of one of the real moats that an L1 can have that make it very difficult for it to get displaced, even if, some of these trends come and go.
That makes a lot of sense. So in terms of competition for Solana, I guess most people on crypto Twitter at least would argue that it's going to be, Sui. They would have said maybe Aptos and Sui until a few months ago, but it seems consensus is more that, Sui is potentially a bigger threat to Solana. Which of the sort of high growth verticals within the Solana ecosystem do you think in a case where Sui does, become slightly problematic for Solana's market share, where would some of that capital go to? Where would it go from, rather? What would suffer within the Solana ecosystem if Sui was to really have an exponential growth over 2025?
It's a difficult question for me to answer. I think Sui, obviously, it's a strong team. They've got a strong tech stack. Same with Aptos. My sense, though, is that that's not really where the threat lies. I think right now that's what the market is pattern matching. They're sort of saying oh, well, Sui, it's got a new stack, it's got super low latency, it's fast, but it doesn't really hold any distinct advantage over Solana that's material to users. I don't think anybody's going to look at that and say wow, here's the reason why I should be using Sui rather than Solana. It may just be that okay, Solana's crowded now and it's more difficult to land transactions because people are using the chain much more and there's a lot more competition. But in principle, that will happen to any chain that has the level of Solana levels of usage. So I think it's more a function of you in order to beat Solana, you can't just be well, I'm Solana with a different flavor. You kind of have to do something better than Solana does, and you have to be materially better enough that people are willing to switch or move over significant amounts of capital or TVL or activity. I'm not really seeing that yet on Sui or on Aptos or anywhere really. Solana is kind of singular at this point, and that's why it's valued the way it's valued. I'm trying to do something very different, very unique, right? And say, look, I'm not about being this, I'm not a world computer. I'm not trying to be, maximally credibly neutral. I'm not trying to not play favorites. I'm not trying to be, World War III resistant. I'm trying to be the NASDAQ of crypto. I'm trying to be fucking fast and fun and really easy to use and just, effortless on the UX side. That's what I'm trying to do. And Ethereum is not trying to do that at all, clearly. And that worked, right? So the question that you should be asking yourself is not, okay, who's going to out Solana? Nobody's going to out Solana. The question is, who is going to do something different than what Solana is offering to its users? That person is the person you should be afraid of.
And while we're on that topic, very, very briefly, before we get to AI and RWAs and payments on Solana, what Solana seems to be doing really, really well, at least over the last 12 months, has been meme coins. And you predicted that meme coins are going to lose dominance throughout 2025, which is obviously very bad news for a lot of the degens out there who have bet very, very big on some of these speculative assets, particularly on Solana. So for these degens out there who might have acted on information coming from people like Murad, who for better or worse have promised astronomical gains and a meme coin super cycle, what's your take on the top meme coins for 2025? Do you think there'll be a silver lining, or are meme coins across the board just sort of doomed to bleed for the next 12 months as other use cases get discovered and AI agents, for instance, take some of that attention?
Yeah, I mean, why were meme coins ever really super successful? I think first you have to answer that question for yourself to understand why did meme coins start now? And Murad, I think one of the things about his thesis that I find very unsatisfying is that there's no real causal story of why now. And obviously meme coins have existed forever. Dogecoin is very, very old, but this meme coin bull run, this craziness, really started at the end of last year. And so you have to ask yourself the question why. And his claim is that, well, people lost confidence in VC coins and technology, and none of this stuff means anything, and it's memes all the way. It's like, okay, really that 2023, late 2023 is when we all realized that all the tech was bullshit and, memes are the only thing that matters. I think that a better explanation is probably that it was low volatility. It was kind of boring. This stuff was kind of too esoteric. People weren't fundamentally excited about the technology at that time. It felt like there was a sort of oversaturation of tech, and there wasn't a fundamental optimism toward technology. And if there's no optimism toward technology, but people still want to have fun, they still want to do the crypto thing, then okay, let's just come up with pictures to trade. I mean, that's kind of what NFTs were. Is like, oh, let's trade pictures and let's call it. And then, okay, well, the pictures don't have to be for every individual token as a picture. Just give the whole token one picture and make it funny. And okay, that's a meme coin. Like all of the token is just, one, it's a funny picture of a dog or it's, a chat or whatever it is. So if that's your explanation of what happened, then okay, what would reverse that trend? One answer would be optimism. If you're optimistic about the technology, that would reverse the pessimism that ultimately drives you towards meme coins and thinking like, okay, well, I don't want to trade the tech coins, but I still want to trade. So, okay, well, we'll trade some fun stuff instead and make that the game. If that optimism comes back, which obviously it came back in a really big way over the last few months with the election of Trump and just the looking forward to what kind of different regulatory environment we're going to be facing over the next few years. But then also now you see the stuff with AI agent coins, which I'm critical of, but obviously right now they have a lot of energy and they're driving a lot of the demand, and they're taking a lot of the eyeballs away from what otherwise would be probably a lot of the meme coin attention and the retail attraction toward meme coins. AI agent speculation is fundamentally optimistic. It's saying like, oh my God, these things right now, they're kind of just chatbots that can talk on Twitter. It's a little bit like a meme coin that can talk back to you, but the reason why people are so excited is that they see a more exciting future about what these chatbots might eventually do, the kind of things that agents might eventually do. And that vision is really animating and exciting people, which tells you that they're fundamentally optimistic about technology.
You also predicted that AI software engineering agents are going to revolutionize the industry. Now, we have seen projects like AI16Z grow to like over $2 billion market cap in anticipation of that. But I'm curious how you think the AI agent meta is going to play out in the coming year, sort of at a high level. What can we expect to see?
Oh, man, it's always hard to predict how a meta that's this early in its development is going to end up playing out. Probably it's going to be weird. It's going to be surprising. And I don't think you can map out exactly the form it's going to take. My overall view is that I think it is going to be a fascination of crypto probably for about a year. I think what you're going to see is a rotation. Right now, the biggest AI influencer is AIXPT. It's also right now happens to be the biggest influencer on crypto Twitter, which is kind of crazy. It has the most mindshare, according to Kaito, of any influencer on Twitter. I think what you will see, though, is that as you get more and more of these, right? AIXPT right now is valued at 600 million. As you get more and more of these popping up, because, when people see like, wow, just by having a bot that talks about price action, you can get, it's huge amounts of following and tons of value in a meme coin. Or an AI agent coin, let's say, then lots of people are going to follow suit and they're going to try to build the same thing. Once you see a ton of these, and I don't know if you have this experience, but now whenever I tweet something, the first 5 replies are all these AI agent bots that like have these kind of cute personalities, but they're all honestly, it's really annoying that tons of my replies now are bots, and they're all trying to be the next AIXPT, but none of them I think are likely to make it. And I think what you'll see over time is that, right now people are very fascinated by these AI influencers. And it's a little bit, I analogize it in the piece to, it's like the first time you ever see an elephant paint, it's amazing. You're just like, oh my God, I can't look at that. The elephant made this amazing painting. And like the painting itself is not that great. It's not a good painting. It's an elephant, but it's like just the fact that an elephant made a painting is so spectacular that you're just mesmerized by it. But the 100th painting, you're kind of like, okay, I've seen it. I don't really need to keep watching elephants paint. And that's kind of the vibe you get right now looking at these AI agents, is that none of them are that clever. None of them are that unique. None of them are really blowing your mind with anything. Like mostly what they're able to do very well is aggregate information. And to be clear, there's a lot of influencers that's all they do. They just aggregate information. So they're like, oh, I saw this in this newsletter. This thing went up 30%. This thing is due for a retrace or whatever, this kind of thing. But you're not really seeing original ideas, right? You're not really seeing, think about somebody like Gwart, who's just out there kind of roasting people and coming up with some clever insight about why, what's some contradiction that's happening in crypto. these agents can't really do that, right? They just don't have the insight to be able to do that kind of thing. So I think what you'll see is that for the course of this year, people will continue to get really excited just because it's also so social. It takes up a lot of our attention and our mind space. But I think the sentiment will actually reverse. I think probably toward the end of this year, people are going to start getting really annoyed by these things. There'll be so many of them. They'll be ubiquitous. They'll just kind of be like, gnats just kind of swarming around everywhere. And people will start to, even though the human influencers, they're maybe less consistent, they're more greedy, they might rug pull you every once in a while, that like the AIs are not going to do that. And they're not posting 24 hours a day the way the AIs are. They never make typos. But the human agents, people will just start to feel a kind of affinity with them, and they'll start to discriminate against the AIs, even for the same quality of content. And it's a little bit like, I don't know if you have this experience, but when I first used Stable Diffusion to see an AI generated image, it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And I'm already at the point now that when I see an AI generated, when I see an image at all, any image, I'm immediately asking, is this AI generated? And if it is, I think less of it, right? I sort of downgrade how impressed I am by this image or this graphic or this design. And so I'm already like mentally, I wasn't looking for this. I'm not trying to think this way, but I'm already attuned to like the fact that this thing is like kind of cheaper and mass produced compared to the artisanal, like, okay, this thing was clearly made by a human designer. And I think we're going to feel the same way about influencers, about Twitter, about social media personalities. I think it's way too early for us to feel that yet, but it will come, especially when, right now, the first 5 replies to your tweets are these agent bots. Pretty soon it's going to be the first 100 replies are going to be these agent bots. And then you're really going to start to feel like, wow, there's more agents on here than there are people. And now you're really starting to get annoyed by how just ubiquitous these things become and how much they're proliferating.
You mentioned earlier stablecoins and payments are going to have a pretty good year. Curious if you think RWAs are also going to enjoy a similar level of success. We saw in the Solana ecosystem recently that companies like Remora are going to be bringing tokenized stocks like Tesla and Nvidia to the masses. So do you think RWAs can also have a success story on Solana over the next 12 months, or is it too early?
I think the answer is that they will grow. I think it'll be a good year for RWAs, but they're growing on a very small base relative to what you're seeing with respect to stablecoins, right? So when we talk about RWAs, I think there's really 2 categories. One is treasuries, which are obviously one of the biggest markets in the world, one of the most liquid financial assets, something that everybody wants access to as just a kind of one of the base elements on the periodic table of finance. Those I think will grow significantly over this upcoming year, especially given that yields aren't expected to drop that much. So we're probably looking at maybe 2 cuts this upcoming year, which means that treasuries are still going to be at 3.5% at best by the end of the year. What that tells me is that treasuries are going to continue to do well. They're going to grow very rapidly, and I think they're perceived as being pretty de-risked. Everything else, I think, is going to grow a lot more slowly. And I think a lot of this is one, the people who live on chain, they're not necessarily looking to get access to Tesla stock. I mean, this is something that crypto has been trying to do for, I don't know, as long as I can remember. 7, 8 years, people try to put stocks on chain, and they do. And every time they do, what they find is the same. They learn the same lesson, which is that, people don't seem to want this. They either want, like, if they're looking to take risk on chain, they either want the most risk, so go buy a meme coin, or they want to take very low risk, which means hold the stable coin. And the middle is just kind of thin, right? There's just not that much demand for the middle as opposed to at the edges. So I think that's where a lot of these things like tokenized stocks or tokenized commodities, that's where a lot of these things sit. I'm more interested in alternative currencies. I think there's a lot bigger story there about how that can displace and improve the financial flows in a lot of places outside the US. I think that's going to grow a lot, but also again on a very small base. RWAs generally, when you think about things like tokenized stocks and commodities, that I think it's going to take longer for that to become a big story.
Clear. And just before we wrap up, 2 very quick questions for you. We enjoy looking into the future, obviously, and deciding where we're going to put our capital. But looking back, what do you think the biggest mistake we made as an industry was in 2024?
Honestly, we kind of nailed it in 2024. Like it's sort of like in 2024 we got an A, and if you got an A, look, like you got a few things wrong, but it's important to understand that like you did really well. The 2022, 2023, not good years for crypto, but 2024, great performance. The only minor notes that I would give to the crypto industry, probably one, be less nihilistic. I think like the nihilism probably did not score us any wins. Like now crypto is really emerging into this broader limelight. There's gonna be a lot more attention on crypto. And I think the financial nihilism association for crypto actually plays very, very badly when you're talking about going mainstream. Maybe that resonates with you, but it looks really, really bad when you're trying to tell a bigger story to the rest of the world about why they should give a shit about crypto. So I think, quickening the embrace of, real financial assets, real innovation, real technology, what's happening at the intersection of crypto and AI, all of that stuff is much more energizing to getting the next tranche of people to get interested in crypto and get excited about what we're building. So that'd be the biggest thing I think that we did wrong as an industry. There's a number of other smaller missteps. I think there's probably a bit too much tribalism that we saw in 2024 that I think, again, would be good to reverse. Because one thing that you saw, going into the election is that there was no distinction between anything in crypto. People thought like, oh, Ripple's the bad one, Solana's the good one, Ethereum is a bunch of losers and they're all, getting lazy and fuck them, but these people are good. And the thing that you see is that we rise and fall as an industry. And when it comes to the real big stuff that affects all of us, it's just crypto. Nobody in DC is being like, oh, well, Solana is this and Ethereum is that. It's like, no, it's just crypto. And we all have to tell one coherent story together. So that's probably the second mistake that I'd point to in 2024. But overall, very positive performance.
Yeah, I like that optimism. And just before I let you go, hottest take for 2025 could be a political hot take, could be based on celebrity tokens, maybe Iggy Azalea makes a comeback. I don't know.
I don't think that's likely. I think that celeb tokens are probably not going to be long for this world, given that so much more of the attention is on technology and technological optimism. I would say that my best hot take, I think that crypto is going to continue pumping until we get the Bitcoin reserve. And then I think after that, the Bitcoin reserve ends up being kind of a nothing burger or sort of a disappointment. And that probably begins a retrenchment. That's, again, not financial advice. I'm just kind of speculating wildly. Who knows? Do your own research. But if I had to guess, that seems like a very likely outcome of how this plays out.
Awesome. And you think 2025 generally moving the same direction, or are we going to experience another 25, 30% crash, dip, correction, however you want to look at it?
We will almost certainly experience a 20% to 30% correction at some point in 2025, but I think it'll be a good year.
So Haseeb, thank you so much for making time to talk to us. I really appreciate it as always, and hopefully we catch up very soon.
Sounds good. My pleasure, man.